Thank you very much. President Perez, it's a great honor and privilege to be here today and to share the podium with these distinguished colleagues and friends. And it's also a pleasure to follow two optimistic presentations. Those of you who were in other sessions were wondering, after all, we are in a conference which is titled Tomorrow. And how can anyone come to a conference that deals with tomorrow unless he believes in tomorrow, unless he is an optimist? So that's why it's refreshing, indeed, to put this tilt. Since Governor Fischer already quoted Shimon Peres, let me follow suit. Shimon Peres once said that he is an optimist. And when he asked why, he said, well, listen, optimists and pessimists both end their lives in the same way. They lead their lives very differently. Isn't it better to lead the life of an optimist? And I think that this at least convinces me. So I, here, am also going to follow the optimist line. I was given 10 minutes to say everything that I know about Europe and China. I will squeeze China out for obvious reasons, but still, it's a problem. So let me make one light remark, the final one. When Bernard Shaw once introduced a colleague of his whom he did not respect very much, he said, well, Mr. X will tell us all of what he knows about the subject in 10 minutes. And Mr. X came to the podium and said, but Mr. Bernard Shaw, how can I tell you everything that I know in 10 minutes? And Bernard Shaw said to him, well, don't worry, if you have difficulties, you can speak slowly. So I will speak relatively fast, and the title is really Europe. Everyone talks about Europe as the source of an existentialistic crisis. And everyone talks about CDS and credit default swaps and all of those kind of mechanical things. Let's not lose sight. Europe, the current concept of Europe, came in the aftermath of a terrible period in Europe, the Second World War, where countries are fighting one against the other, and two important leaders in Europe, Monnet, Schuman, have designed a system or a dream that said, let's create a system in which all of us are going to be stakeholders enough so that we will prevent the past to come back to haunt us. And to begin with, let's develop a unified monetary policy. We will give up our independent monetary policy. We will not have, in fact, monetary policy. It will be one single central bank. We will not have several currencies. We will have only one. We will give up exchange rate policies. But then they said, in such a case, how can we all fit in the same bed? One is big, one is small, we have only one blanket. And they said, well, we will take a decade to move towards convergence so that the fat guys will get the medium size, the slim guys will get into their size, and after a decade, when we will adopt the same norms of fiscal policy, we will be able to get rid of the other kind of domestic policies. And indeed, a decade took place, and the name of a little city in Holland named Maastricht became the name of a treaty, according to which there are rules of operation. If you want to join, you better agree that your budget deficit will not exceed 3% of GDP, your debt to GDP ratio will not exceed 60%, etc. It took a decade. 10 years ago or 11 years ago, the convergence was declared as achieved, the European Central Bank was created, and the party started going. The problem was that once the party started going, people did not take the punch bowl away while they happened. And each country in the group responded differently. Some have increased their spending in a dramatic way and reduced savings. Greece, Portugal, etc. Some increased their savings. Germany. Some have decided to cut their spending. Italy, etc. Some increased their savings. Germany. Some have decided to cut their spending. Germany. Some increased their savings. Germany. Some have decided to cut their spending. 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 Germany. Some have decided to cut the improve their productivity. Some have resulted with lost productivity. And after a decade, Germany improved productivity and competitiveness against all the rest of the members. Other countries, whether it's Italy, Spain, Ireland, Greece, of course, have lost competitiveness, and they were all supposed to stay in the same bed. And the needs were different. But if the needs are different, the question is, how can they tolerate those differences against the different objectives? And indeed, when you look today at unemployment rates in Germany being about 7% and in Spain being more than 20%, you ask yourself, do they belong to the same bed? Can they actually sustain that issue? I have no doubt that if they knew all of what they know now at creation, they probably would have not admitted everyone until a little bit tougher conditions were placed. But now, so to speak, bygones are bygones, very complicated to unscramble the scrambled eggs. As Shimon always say, you can make a scrambled egg out of an egg, you cannot make an egg out of a scrambled egg. But that's the reality. And the question is how to proceed. It so happens that Greece came into that situation in the worst way. Their debt have increased to 150% of GDP, and their unemployment rate is high, the budget is wrong, and the markets immediately penalize them. And as the market penalized them, the problem arose. I can tell you today, Greece is not anymore the name of a country. It's the name of a phenomenon that is shared by many countries, Portugal, Greece, Ireland. Each one thinks that he is different, but by and large, they belong to the same range of issues, which is also the tragedy of lack of solutions. If Greece was standalone, then everyone knows what would have been the answer. And the answer would have been found and implemented. In fact, let's remember, we don't invent the wheel now. Latin America had a huge debt crisis years ago. Many people, some people on the podium have dealt with it, and Latin America is now the example of success. The problem with dealing with the problem of Greece let stand alone is the contagion. They are paralyzed. So if you ask the minister from another country in Europe, what keeps you up at night? He tells you Greece. When you ask the Greek minister what keeps you up at night, you are told the fact that the solution that is correct for me cannot be implemented because of the other countries. So that's where we are now, and the next question is how to solve it. The contagion is, as was already indicated, is coming through the interdependence of the banking sector. Today, other countries in Europe, French banks, German banks, are holding a lot of the debt of the countries that are in trouble. Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, etc. If the countries that are in trouble are going to allow themselves to go under a little bit, those banks will be in deep trouble. Hence, when Sarkozy and Merkel are saying we need to save Greece, they really mean we need to save the boat that we are part of, and our own banks are part of that. So it's becoming a bigger issue, and therefore it is not anymore a country-specific issue. Where is the solution lying, and what is happening literally today? A year ago, literally in May, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was at the time the head of the IMF, and a very effective one, I should say, came with, together with the other leaders, came with a fundamental package that put on the table $1 trillion, which was supposed to avoid any fear of default. And yet, the markets were not impressed. And the markets said, we do not believe in it. And you ask yourself, why? And the answer is that those who designed the package per se wanted to ensure that there is no default. But the markets and the Greek people wanted to ensure that once this cycle is over, growth is resumed, and Greek can enter into the market on its own feet, rather than having to rely again on external support. And here is the real issue. You start your race as a marathon runner with a very heavy luggage on your back. And in Latin America, we had the same problem again 20 years ago, when the debt crisis meant that the Latin Americans could not service the debt fully. It took Brady, the Secretary of State of the United States, during his period, to change the strategy a little bit by saying, if you are about to run a marathon with a heavy load on your back, I know you cannot even make the first step. Let me reduce a little bit the weight on you, reduce the size of the initial debt in one way or another, but make it highly conditional that you do the right policy so that when you reach the finish line, we will all be win-win. This was the secret then, and the world is still in search for an implementation of something which is similar here. Let me not continue with the second part of my assignment, except to take 60 seconds on that. I am optimistic because of the fact that the world has new locomotives. And one of the themes of my dear friend Jimmy Wolfenson is that the emerging countries are the new locomotives of the world. In many places, you see businessmen asking themselves the question, is China a threat or an opportunity? And more people come to the conclusion, China is an opportunity. It's the largest size of the market, and in fact, it is enough to look at one simple statistic. Of all the exports of Europe that go to all over the world, 10 years ago, only 3% went to China. Today, 20%. Of all the exports of the United States, 10 years ago, less than 5% went to China. Today, again, closer to 20%. The business community recognizes it, and it will be very wise that the official community will not allow the currency war and the debates of antagonism to deflect attention from the real win-win strategy that can be there. So I'll conclude with this by just asking one thing. When you look at these matters, we need to use a telescope rather than a microscope, because with a microscope, you really get confused with the little ants that are walking around. There is a bright future and the sun is shining. Thank you.